first question I'd like to ask is, how did you get into astrology?
Well, it was quite a unusual story, but I suppose everybody's is. I like what Liz Green says about astrology kind of selects the time for coming into your life rather than the other way around. It's a kind of visitation, from the astrological daimon or muse. I was a university student at Harvard in the United States, and I was studying psychology and intellectual history. But I had a girlfriend who was also at Harvard, Radcliffe, who had a psychotherapist who was Jungian, from Switzerland, who was trained by Jung, knew Jung personally. And this is back in the late 1960s, early 70s, and he and I became friends, and like once a week we'd get together and have conversations about European ideas and things. And he must have asked me my birth data, but one day he said, well, here's where your moon is, and here's where your sun is, and planets. And I thought he'd taken leave of his senses because he was so intelligent, and like, why are we now talking about astrology?
Yes.
So as soon as I could, I turned the conversation back to higher planes of talking about Freud and Jung and cultural ideas and so forth. And then astrology kind of wasn't on my horizon for a couple of years. And then after Harvard, I went to Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, to study with Stanislav Grof and Joseph Campbell and Gregory Bateson. And it was there in an environment where many, many different ancient, esoteric, mystical practices and ideas were being discussed, were being practiced, explored. And I lived there for 10 years, and right on the cliffs of the Pacific Ocean.
Beautiful day.
And and astrology was part of the mix. People just knew what, they had their birth charts and knew it. And in particular, though, what turned me fully in the direction of studying astrology was my doctoral research was on LSD psychotherapy, the combination of psychoanalysis with powerful psychoactive substances, LSD or psilocybin, mescaline. And working with Stan Grof, who was kind of the leader in that field, internationally, we had tried to find different psychological tests that would help us predict what kinds of experiences people would have when they would have their sessions. And nothing like Rorschach, thematic apperception tests, MMPI, none of them were of any value of the standard psychological tests, even though people are taking the same substance, the same quantity, but they're having totally different experiences. Some are having, spiritual ecstasy. Other people are having, underworld experiences that even get into hell, and no exit crises. And someone was in one of these seminars as a student and said, and he was an astrologer, and he said, in his experience, people's experience, like everyday experiences as well as big ones, were correlated with what their transits were to their birth chart. So Stan and I were just open enough at that point to say, okay, well, teach us how to calculate birth charts. This is before computers. So I learned how to calculate birth charts, how to calculate transits, had Ebertines, combinations, stellar influence, and had one other, this is before Rob Hand's textbook, had one other Sequoian and Acker to check what kinds of experiences happen with those transits. And that's what, of all things, astrology was the last we were expecting. That was the most helpful in understanding the qualities of experience that people had in these all sorts of, not only through shamanic experiences, sacred medicine, but also spontaneous psychological transformations, intellectual awakenings, it just started opening up from there. And I just studied famous people's charts. What did Galileo have when he turned his telescope to the heavens, etc.
Yeah,
So
just
that-
clarify. People were taking, you was seeing what trances were happening to people's planets and what sort of trips they were
Yes,
going on.
yes, and it would be, as I've used the phrase, it wasn't, the transits were not concretely predictive of what experiences they would have, but they were archetypally predictive. They gave a sense of, okay, in this, this person's got a Pluto conjunct Mars transit, and they had these powerful experiences of becoming a predatory lion at the time of, devouring the prey of the gazelle, or a Kundalini fire just surging through them, or somebody else would have a transit of Saturn conjunct Pluto, and they could have an experience of being reliving a trauma in wartime. And another experience a person would have a Neptune trine the Sun transit, and they would have a spiritual awakening and a sense of that their personal identity was one with the universe. So it was that kind of, once I got to see how to read the transits, it was just opened up thematically.
Well, I think that's really fascinating. I mean, I've never been convinced that astrology and psychology are kind of together, so to speak. It does affect people on such a deep emotional level. But do you believe that astrology does affect us on a deep emotional level?
Oh, very much. But doesn't have to be conscious. I mean, they don't have to know astrology, obviously. But it does seem to basically be, in fact, the deeper a person goes into what's happening in their unconscious, their deep psyche, what comes through in dreams, what comes through in the images that spontaneously come into consciousness when they're in meditation or in therapy and so forth, in their artistic work, artistic expression. That is the most expressive of their transits, which is really reflecting their deep psyche. Stan Grof, who's the founder of transpersonal psychology, he called astrology the Rosetta Stone of the human psyche. The Rosetta Stone. It's like a key to unlocking its deeper structures and dynamics, and the timing, as well as the archetypal character of psychological experience.
Yesterday said that astrology really has always been something that is sidelined, is on the periphery of society or communities and things like that. Where do you think astrology could go in the 21st century? Where do you think it can go? Do you think it's going to be more psychologically based, or with the my interest, I have another interest, quantum physics, and I try to, with difficulty, marry the two subjects together.
Yes.
With all the discoveries that they're making, especially at the Large Hadron Collider, where do you think astrology could go?
Well, I think much will depend on two factors. One is astrologers and what kind of bridges they make in relationship to other disciplines like quantum physics or like economics or like archaeology, history, as well as psychology. Psychology is a key, but I think the more that astrologers become really competent and perhaps even super competent, brilliant in other disciplines, and then they show how astrology connects to those disciplines and may mutually illuminate each other. That's going to help the mainstream culture move into an acceptance of astrology. The other thing is, I think there's so much armoring in the mainstream modern mind against astrology that it's going to take some kind of spiritual psychological and intellectual radical transformation for them to make that shift. And that often happens in times of crisis. As many people in their personal lives in crisis, that's when they want to see an astrologer or a counselor of some kind, a psychic, somebody that gives them some orientation. They get more open to other perspectives because the perspectives they have aren't enough to have. Well, if the entire culture is going through something like that kind of a crisis, as in many ways we seem to be on the precipice of with the global climate change, ecological, but also economic, even spiritual, social, political. There is an evolution happening in the collective mind, cross-culturally. Young people are more open than older people, I find, in being and ready to entertain a wider range of perspectives, and they haven't kind of walled it off as much. Just as they haven't with things like feminism, or it's just much more accepted. Or the same thing, young people with respect for gay marriage and things like that. It's not a big an issue as it is for older people, generally speaking. And I think a philosophical change may also just gradually evolve to allow astrology to be more part of the big picture. Let me just say, in terms of your quantum physics interest, do you know the work of Will Keepin? Keepin, William Keepin?
No,
well, years ago he did there's an article that was published in the Mountain Astrologer, but he's a friend of mine. He was a physicist, an excellent physicist, and quantum physics, knew David Bohm personally, and he also knew astrology, and Groth's work, etc. And he made some I think helpful bridges between quantum physics and astrology. And you could look it up in the Mountain Astrologer is an American astrology journal, so you might enjoy that. But there are some scientists who do, often through an inner transformation, they become more ready to hear a wider, like the possibility of astrology having some validity. Rupert Sheldrake, for example, or people in, I mentioned Will Keepin. So I think Victor Mansfield, who wrote Synchronicity, Science, and Soul Making, he's another physicist, now deceased, very fine man, I liked a lot, from Cornell. And Colgate, he taught there as a professor. But I think trying to push it at them directly is generally not going to work because they've got the prejudice.
They are quite prejudiced, and they're closed-minded. That's what I found quite fascinating about scientists.
Yes.
That throughout, they're supposed to be open, but they're not. We've had Dr. Brian Cox in this country on TV with, I've forgotten the name of the Irish comedian. It's the language that they use that it's stupid.
It's very...
It's very strong language.
Yes.
And when it's on TV and it's going out to millions of people, I think, I find that quite sad.
Well, that's why I discussed that in the Carter lecture yesterday, this balance that we have to carry, this tension between knowing what astrology can do and how low the opinion is of the cultural mainstream, and especially by these dogmatic kind of high priests of the scientific or materialist priesthood kind of. And that's why I played that John Cleese
brilliant
YouTube link. Joe was not, he wasn't astrologically initiated the way Jung was. And Jung was his teacher in many ways, but I think Joe didn't get exposed to, really, like, astrologers doing charts for him where it could open up. I think he just had a general appreciation of the mythic perspective, and he would have seen astrology as one of those many esoteric, mythic, religious orientations that use archetypal symbols to understand human life, and in that sense it would have validity. But I don't think, see, when I was working with Joe, we were focused more on what he knew and not what I knew, and he died just after I finished Passion of the Western Mind, 1987. And that's why he earlier that year written this very nice review of it. But he didn't live during the period when I was starting to make more public my astrological work, and so I didn't ever, show it to him. And it wasn't him. I mean, Stan Groff probably talked to him about it, So my guess is that Joe just had the. He would have had a kind of general openness to it, but he wasn't the kind of person. Same thing with other more, like, say, doing a shamanic ceremony. I don't think he would have particularly taken ayahuasca with a tribe in Peru. I got two books that are I'm very ready to come out as soon as I have enough time to kind of do the careful. I'm a slow, careful writer, to try, and I try to steal a couple hours each morning to write more, etc. But I'm going to have to find ways of stopping traveling, doing conferences, and also my full-time, my teaching back in San Francisco, to be able to finish these books. But the two books that I've got about 5 altogether that I really would like to write before I pass on to the next incarnation. But in these two, one would be a handbook of the planetary archetypes. That I'd have one that would be for more popular audience, and one that would be more for a professional and clinically trained audience. And then the other is I'd like to, it would be more following up Passion of the Western Mind and the first part of Cosmos and Psyche, where I'm seeking to understand our moment in history in a very broad way. Not particularly, wouldn't be particularly astrological. It'd be, though, that's always in me, but it would be more looking at the larger evolution of consciousness and the transformation and threshold of enormous transformation that our species, our planet, and our civilizations going through, but connected with the entire history of humanity, the evolution of the Western worldview, patriarchy, the scientific revolution, Christianity, bringing those into a larger frame of reference. I know what I'd like to say, it's ready to come, but I just have to get the time to do it. So those are the two big books I've got coming.
Okay, that's lovely, thank you.
You're welcome.